4 deep up in the Malibu. I slide through where they slide through and serve beef like a drive-through. My crew brings Christ to the alley. I'm a Cali fool, feed him the rock, call it the alley-oop. Yeah, Brody is yanking where I bring the word. Gunshots, holding prayer circles where they stain the curb. We make disciples where they're toting glocks, cause it's funkier than dope fiend socks. The block's hotter than some old steam pots. They rock product till the whole thing drops, chopping and hit the block from old green knots. God's the Father
and welcome everybody to another edition of the Brody File. Glad you're with us. Happy New Year, happy 2017. Hey liberals, 2016, not a good year. Why? Right, Donald Trump won the presidency. 2017, sorry, probably going to be worse because Donald Trump will be president January 20th. Lots to discuss about his first 100 days. We'll get to all of that and some other show because we really want to talk about the pomp and circumstance of the actual presidential inauguration, what's going to be going down, who's going to be, what bands are going to be in the inauguration, all the important stuff, right? Actually, we had a chance to talk with someone on that Presidential Inauguration Committee right here in D.C. Have a look. And joining us now, Alex Stroman here, a Deputy Communications Director for the Presidential Inauguration Committee. Did I get that right?
That's right, that's right.
That's pretty impressive by me, if I do say so myself.
Great job, great job.
Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you, thanks for having me.
Tell me a little bit about what we're going to see in these, I guess 3 key days, right? Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or take me through some of this.
That's right. Well, starting with especially the public events. We'll start off on Thursday morning and then end sometime mid-Saturday afternoon. And I think that one of the key takeaways that we have as an organization is the charge from the President-elect. And the President-elect's charge to us has been to make this about the American people. You know, a lot of ceremonies sometimes seem like maybe a coronation or some type of celebrity and entertainer-backed inaugural. And that's not really what this celebration is about. One, you have a president who's ready to get to work from day one. That's why the American people elected into the office, to kind of do away with some of the old ways of Washington and bring in a new era that's about getting to work for the American people. And you've already seen that happen. If you look at the carrier deal and look at the Ford announcement recently, this is a president-elect who's already getting to work. And so you're going to see reflected in his inauguration from start to finish, first, this commitment to getting to work, but also honoring some of the traditions of the past.
So tell me a little bit about what we're going to see then on Thursday. Let's save inauguration day for a moment, but Thursday, what kind of lead up do we have exactly?
So Thursday is when the president-elect will arrive in D.C. Washington D.C. for the first time, and he'll start off his day, his public day, with a wreath laying at Arlington Cemetery. He and the vice president-elect will go pay their respects there, and I think that's a really key moment for this incoming president to show that his first commitment on his first time in Washington as president-elect and leading up to the inaugural ceremony is to show that to thank the service of those who have come before us, who have honored our freedoms. From there, he'll move to we have a pre-concert, basically a Voices of the American People, a chance for the American people to really show their talents and show kind of the real people aspect of what's so important to this president. And then right after that, we'll have a welcome celebration featuring some entertainment acts, but also some of the military aspects as well, our military bands, to really just kind of kick off this inaugural week. And so that'll end the public events portion on Thursday night.
On Thursday. Tell me about the big day on Friday. What should we expect?
Well, so the interesting thing too is this president-elect honoring the traditions of the past. And so you'll see on Thursday morning, the president and his family will start off with a private church service at St. John's Church. It's tradition know that at least dates back to FDR. But every president since Madison has actually worshiped there at the church. And so he'll start his morning off there. And again, it kind of shows his commitment to the faith aspect and how the importance that it's going to play in his church service, in his inaugural ceremony. And then from there, when invited by the president, he'll go to the White House, have coffee with the first family. And from there, he and President Obama will proceed to the Capitol, where he'll be sworn in. He'll have the swearing in at noon there on the west front of the Capitol. He'll see off, at that point, former President Obama and Mrs. Obama as they depart Washington. And then he'll go in and have a couple more traditional. They'll have a luncheon there that's put on by the Senate and the House, honoring the new president, President Trump. From there, he'll start the inaugural parade. And the inaugural parade is something that again, is honoring the tradition of the past, but it's something that you're going to see shortened. President Eisenhower famously had a parade, I believe, that lasted almost 5 hours long. This parade is going to be shorter than previous years. It's going to be about an hour and a half. Because, again, this is showing the president-elect's commitment to getting to work and having time to go into the White House and really get to work, with executive orders, signing pieces of legislation on his desk, and just following through on that commitment to change Washington.
Interesting. Let me ask you, and then finally on Saturday, very important, especially for our faith audience here, about what will happen on Saturday at the National Cathedral. Talk to us.
Right, so we have a prayer service, tradition that's occurred in previous inaugurals, and you'll see multi-faiths represented, but really a commitment to this idea of having a higher power and relying on that as President of the United States and seeking that counsel. And so whether it's with the first prayer service, starting his day off, the inauguration with the prayer, with his private prayer service, or the Saturday morning prayer service as well, is showing that this president's going to be someone who relies on the faith community. He did throughout his election, and he will as president as well. And one other interesting thing I'd like to note is the ceremony itself. This, for the first time, I guess we'll have more participation from faith leaders in this prayer service, in the inaugural ceremony itself than ever before.
A lot of stuff going down on January 20th. Post January 20th, a lot of policy stuff will be going down in those first 100 days. Obamacare clearly on top of all of the list. More on that later in the show. But speaking of Obamacare, what will be tied to that is that Planned Parenthood funding, or at least the defunding that pro-life groups want to see President Trump do pronto. We had a chance to speak to Lila Rose, the CEO of Live Action, who's going to be right in the thick of things when it comes to this pro-life fight in D.C., on the Hill, and within and part of that Trump administration. Have a look at our interview. Lila Rose here, president and founder of Live Action. Hello, Lila.
Hi, David. How are
Great
you?
to see you. We're
Good to
just
see you
good
too.
friends, are we
Yes,
not?
yes, of course.
Let me get your take on the Trump administration. They're coming in. Are you hopeful? Where are you on the 1 to 10 meter here with Trump? How do you feel?
I think when it comes to life, we could have the 10, the clear path to complete redirection of the government funding of taxpayer money away from the biggest abortion provider. Planned Parenthood is killing over 320,000 kids a year. They're getting over $500 million a year. So the fact that Trump has said he would defund Planned Parenthood, and we have the House and the Senate with staunch pro-life leaders in both, it's possible now, and the job needs to be done.
What's it going to take to defund Planned Parenthood? How heavy of a lift is this going to be, or is it a little bit easier than people think? Because they're, not to get into the weeds and budget reconciliation, but I mean, there is a path here, right? I mean, what is the path?
The path is totally there. So we have a majority in the House. Actually, last year, the House and the Senate passed a reconciliation spending bill that got to the president's desk, to President Obama's desk, that didn't include 80% of funding for Planned Parenthood. So that was huge. That would have defunded them $400 million plus. And that they need to do that again. So the path is more clear than it's ever been. There's no reason they can't do it, David. Trump campaigned on it. Many of the folks in the Senate and the House campaigned on it. And it's something that the American people want so badly, because we don't want taxpayer funding going towards abortion. So the fight is actually going to be, I believe, in the court of public opinion and educating Americans about what's happening.
You know, I knew you were going to say education because information is key to all of this. And what does the Trump staff, if you will, the administration, need to understand? What's the one or two key ingredients of information that they need to understand to make sure that this can be won in the court of public opinion?
It's a great question. And I think some of the folks surrounding Trump already get it, like Kellyanne Conway gets it, Mike Pence gets it on abortion. The first step is to realize that Americans don't sit right with abortion. And to further draw that out, explain what the abortion procedure actually does to the child, explain how the abortion is not empowering to women, how it's against the woman, and to have candid discussions about the extremism of groups like Planned Parenthood, as Hillary Clinton was extreme on abortion through all 9 months. So that's part one. And then part two is showing how Planned Parenthood is not about health care. They're not about women's health care. It's the biggest lie since the tobacco industry said tobacco was healthy. Planned Parenthood provides less than 2% of cancer screenings, pap smears for women, and yet they provide over a third of abortions in this country. They are focused on abortion, and that needs to get out to the American people.
Talk to me a little bit about what you have coming in January, because it seems like this is you guys have these campaigns that are like, I mean, talk about tens of millions of hits and in terms of what you're doing in past campaigns. Tell me a little bit about this new one.
So we are, Live Action's gearing up to go into that court of public opinion and explain and educate, to teach what a Planned Parenthood actually is and what they do. So we have a mini docuseries that we will be launching in late January, and it will be exposing through undercover investigative footage, through the testimonies of ex-Planned Parenthood workers and clients, exposing that Planned Parenthood is focused myopically on abortion, on the horrific practice of abortion, killing children, telling women that this is the best path. And they're lying, they're straight up lying to American women about providing options, about providing prenatal care, about providing mammograms, about providing other services. And really they're coding, or they're shielding their abortion corporation with these lies about other services. They're not about health, they're about abortion.
Lila Rose here on the Brody File. All right, when we come back, it's the B Block. That means Jenny is in the B Block talking about persecuted Christians overseas in Turkey. Back in a moment. And welcome back, everybody, to the Brody File. Hey, by the way, a new report out showing that Christians are the most persecuted religious group in the entire world. And really, it should come as no surprise. We see stories of religious persecution of Christians all over the globe in this world. One of those places is Turkey. And Jennifer Wishon, here in the B Block, has that story of persecuted Christians in Turkey up against it.
In Turkey, American pastor Andrew Brunson sits in prison, facing trumped-up charges of terrorism. He's a Christian who lives and preaches in Turkey, and experts say that's enough to put him at risk.
So today, I would argue that Turkey, particularly Turkey's Christians and Jews, are going through a very difficult period.
Dr. Aykan Ademir is a Muslim Turk who's dedicated his career to helping Christians, Jews, and other religious minorities gain full religious freedom in his country. It was his core mission as a member of Turkey's parliament, but he faced roadblocks. Now he advocates from Washington, D.C., working with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies.
I think Christians have learned to live under constant threat of physical or symbolic violence. They're used to constant messages of hate. They're used to Turkey's culture of impunity, meaning they know that there will be very lenient sentencing to the assailants.
And things got worse last summer, he says, after a coup attempted to topple Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Turkish authorities were already suspicious of Protestants, especially missionaries. Since the coup, it's gotten worse.
When we talk about Turkey, we're talking about basically the biblical lands. This is the country that hosts a lot of the Jewish and Christian sites. So there's a very rich heritage, and it's so sad to see how Turkey's Islamists systematically not only marginalize them, but also portray them as being foreign.
In the coming months, Ademir fears other Protestant pastors and missionaries could be framed by security forces like Pastor Brunson. And following the coup, it's hard to find Turks willing to speak out for their Christian neighbors.
The majority of citizens are afraid to talk because since July 15th, 110,000 civil servants have been fired from their jobs, 37,000 people have been arrested, hundreds of news outlets, including newspapers, magazines, TV, and radio stations, have been closed.
It's an issue President-elect Trump will have to confront, as Ademir and others fear America's NATO ally increasingly resembles an authoritarian regime. Jennifer Wishon for The Brody File.
Jennifer Wishon here on the Brody File. All right, when we come back, Obamacare, front and center with the Trump administration. What's going to happen? How can they go about repealing and replacing this thing? Answers from Amber C. Strong when we come back. And welcome back, everybody, to the Brody File. All right, time now to talk about Obamacare. Yeah, sorry, liberals, it's going away. Now, the good news for you liberals is that it will go away slowly. They're not going to be able, they, being Republicans, Trump, not going to be able to repeal this thing right away altogether. But unfortunately for you liberals, it is going away, guaranteed. More on that from Amber C. Strong.
The results are in, and it's a big win for Obamacare, at least when it comes to the number of people seeking coverage.
If you're not covered yet, now is the time to sign up.
6.4 million Americans signed up for the healthcare exchange in 2017. That's up 400,000 from this time last year. It's a mad dash for coverage before a Republican-controlled Congress and President-elect Trump take office. A new administration could spell a big loss for President Obama's signature healthcare bill. Members of Congress hope to pass a budget in January that could allow them to quickly repeal the Affordable Care Act.
The sooner we can go in a different direction, the better.
Former Bush administration Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services Tevi Troy tells CBN News that it won't be as easy as some people think.
We're not sure that they can repeal the whole thing, and if they do so, they recognize that there are not 60 Republican votes in the Senate, so they would have to do something called reconciliation, which is a budgetary mechanism that lets you pass something with only 51 votes in the Senate, but it limits what you can do. So not everything, they can't do a bill that says we hereby repeal every jot and tittle of the Affordable Care Act.
Troy advises Republicans to take a different path than Democrats did before by pushing through one big bill. He suggests they come up with reforms to make health insurance cheaper and easier for people to purchase coverage. So what about the millions of Americans who now rely on Obamacare?
They will have to target whatever reform or replacement they do to make sure that those 20 million people are not disrupted and can get some care.
Another target for the new Congress could be defunding Planned Parenthood. Last go-around, Congress pushed to cut Medicaid money from Planned Parenthood, and for now that still appears to be the plan.
We've already shown what we believe with respect to funding Planned Parenthood. We put a bill on President Obama's desk in reconciliation. Our position has not changed.
President Obama vetoed that bill, but a new President Trump is coming to town, and pro-life advocates hope to gain ground this time around.
Last year, the House and the Senate passed a reconciliation spending bill that got to the president's desk, to President Obama's desk, that didn't include 80% of funding for Planned Parenthood. So that was huge. That would have defunded them $400 million plus. And that they need to do that again. So the path is more clear than it's ever been.
So what else is on Speaker Ryan's wish list? He says fixing a broken tax code and getting rid of government overreach take priority when the 115th Congress take office in January.
Amber C. Strong here on the Brody File. All right, when we come back, Dr. Ben Carson, he's going to be part of Trump's cabinet, Housing and Urban Development Secretary. What's that all about? Why exactly? Answers from someone who knows him well in a moment. And welcome back, everybody, to the Brody File. Hey, Ben Carson, nominated by Donald Trump to be Housing and Urban Development Secretary, or the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, however you want to say it. A lot of folks thought he might get the Health and Human Services spot, or possibly the Department of Education slot. He didn't. But you know, when it comes to housing and urban development, healthcare, education, two crucial parts of the infrastructure within many urban communities around the country, and Dr. Carson would probably do a pretty good job at that. But don't take my word for it. Dina Bass, who actually worked with Ben Carson on his campaign as communication director and is very well aware of what he and his wife Candy have done throughout their lives, discussed that with, guess what, Amber C. Strong. She's back. Have a look.
The rumor is that Dr. Carson was offered several other positions, but he chose HUD. Why?
You know, I do know that he wanted to be at HUD, you know, and people obviously say that HHS or Surgeon General will match him better because of his, you know, great experience in those areas. But HUD is ground zero for solving issues of poverty in our nation. You know, we've been fighting this war on poverty for 50 years and we are losing. And Dr. Carson and his wife Candy have done a lot of work to empower and increase opportunities for people in underserved communities. And so I think that he really does have a heart for this issue, and he is a solutionist. He is a results-driven, outcomes-driven solutionist, and that is simply what we need. We don't need politicians. We don't need the consultant class. We don't need people who are invested in ideology. We need people who are invested in outcomes, and that's what Dr. Carson is.
Speaking of Dr. Carson and Dr. Carson, because technically, when you talk about Candy Carson, she's been so pivotal in his outreach in the community with their reading rooms and things of that nature. How much of a voice was she on the campaign trail, and how much is she going to be in his future?
You know, well, they are a team, but I don't, to speak to what she will do in terms of in relation to HUD, she is his wife and she is his greatest champion. I absolutely loved being on the campaign trail with them. They are, and you've had a chance to be around them both. Dr. Carson is very calm and, even Steven. Candy Carson is a ball of energy. She's just a fierce force, and they have been a team for 40 years. And for me to get a chance to get to know them and see them together, working together to solve problems and help, advance opportunities to kids and offer scholarships with the Carson Scholars Fund, that was also a great thing to see. A lot of people don't understand the impact that Dr. Carson and Candy Carson have had with their reading rooms. I think it's like over 160 reading rooms across the U.S.
Amber C. Strong doing double duty here on the Brody File. Unfortunately, Amber, FYI, I don't think you're getting paid extra for that. But, hey, it's all part of a day's work. Back in a moment, with an Oy Vey moment of the week where there's a lot of gibberish going on. Welcome back, everybody, to the Brody File. Hey, time now. We haven't done this in a while, but we're going to do it this week because, it's the new year. We want to start it off fresh. Time for the Oy Vey moment of the week. Hey, look, one of the things we do here on the Brody File is we kind of have a lot of gibberish. We speak. We really don't know what we're saying overall. Well, this is a perfect example of when I had not a clue what I was saying. It actually happened on the 700 Club during a live shot. I had a little bit of a trouble getting this word out. There are folks up here on Capitol Hill that would like to actually see it to be 4+ years. Now, that's excuse me, I can't even say it, somewhat of a non-starter, if you will. There it is, the Oy Vey moment of the week. I am this week's Oy Vey moment of the week. Hey, all right, I win a trophy. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, everybody, God bless. Have a great week. We are going to have so much coverage of this inauguration.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Oh, that is amazing.
Wait till you see this, and liberals, I would go to sleep. Have a great week.